A complete meltdown of humanity in Aleppo. That's the stark assessment from the United Nations. It says it has evidence that 82 civilians, including women and children, have been shot dead on the spot by Syrian government forces.
We've been receiving reports that many civilians have been detained by pro-government forces. We've also been informed that pro-government forces have been entering civilian homes and killing those individuals found inside, including women and children.
A mass flight from the front line for those who can escape, but tens of thousands remain trapped in the city where rebel fighters are on the edge of defeat. We'll be asking whether even at this 11th hour there can be any hope of a safe evacuation of civilians. Also this lunchtime. A walkout by train drivers from Southern Rail brings the network to a halt and misery for commuters.
I wish there was some other way for these people to resolve their dispute rather than completely messing it up for the average commuter.
See, this is the problem. I have uni, I have exams to do, and there's no trains running. So how am I meant to get anywhere today?
Inflation hits a two-year high, up to 1.2% in November. And Donald Trump appoints the head of ExxonMobil, Rex Tillerson, as US Secretary of State.
In the south, more on today's rail strike. Empty stations and thousands of commuters' lives thrown into chaos. And an inquest begins on the Isle of Wight into little Kezia, who died with her father.
Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. The UN says it has reports of pro-Syrian government forces in eastern Aleppo entering people's homes and shooting them on the spot. It said it had reliable evidence that 82 people, including women and children, had been massacred and that it looked like there'd been a complete meltdown of humanity. Thousands of people are reportedly trapped in the last neighbourhood still in rebel hands as pro-government troops advance. And this lunchtime, it's reported by UNICEF that possibly more than 100 children are trapped in a building under heavy attack. Our correspondent Thomas Morgan sent this report from neighbouring Beirut.
The last push for pro-government forces. They know the goal is within sight. The rebels struggling to hold on to the few districts that remain under their control. As the president's forces and allies sweep through retaking East Aleppo, thousands have been fleeing, Russia claiming they've aided 100,000 escape opposition-held areas. Today, fresh allegations of war crimes against the regime. 82 civilians killed, women and children among them, in their home, according to the UN.
Civilians have paid a brutal price during this conflict, and we're filled with the deepest foreboding for those who remain in this last hellish corner of opposition-held eastern Aleppo. While some reportedly managed to flee yesterday, some were reportedly caught and killed on the spot, and others were arrested.
With the fighting going on around them, those still trapped sending what they say are their final messages, a plea for an end to their nightmare.
Don't believe anymore in the United Nations. Don't believe anymore in the international community. Don't think that they are not satisfied with what's going on. They are satisfied that we are being killed.
Social media has been awash with similar messages from East Aleppo. 7-year-old Bana Al-Abed, who's tweeted along with her mother throughout the war in Aleppo, posted, "My dad is injured now. I am crying." Her father's text to the BBC, "Guess it's goodbye. Thanks all who stand for us and pray for us." The White Helmet, a Syrian volunteer group. All streets and destroyed buildings are full with dead bodies. It's hell. It's believed tens of thousands of civilians are still trapped in the ever-shrinking rebel enclave. But even though the fighting may be almost over, their suffering goes on. Thomas Morgan, BBC News, Beirut.
Well, we can speak now to our correspondent Lise Doucet, who's also in Beirut after reporting from Aleppo for the past week. Lise, there's a real sense of foreboding for civilians, but the UN is saying that even at this 11th hour, there could be a safe evacuation of civilians.
Yes, still saying even as the Syrian army and its allies close in on the remaining rebels and thousands of civilians trapped in a very small corner of land, that it's never too late to save lives. These are the final hours of the battle for Aleppo, the city that has come to symbolize, not just in Syria, but around the world, the suffering of Syria. Day in, day out, so many pleas to rescue the trapped civilians, to let the weak, the vulnerable, the children, the elderly, the ill, the injured leave, not leave under fire, but leave for an orderly evacuation and not having any impact on the ground. Yesterday, the US Secretary of State, John Kerry, who's been in furtive discussions with his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, say, show a little grace, he said to the Syrian army and to Russia in these last hours. The Syrian army is on the brink of its most important battlefield victory in this war. It has caused celebrations in the west of Aleppo in what they say is a victory in their battle against terrorism. But in these final hours, it is the huge concern for the plight of civilians that is preoccupying people across Syria and beyond. What you just heard about this moment of deep foreboding and profound fear in one side of the city is also relief, intense relief among so many others, that this war, this brutal war, is at last coming to an end. But what an end it is.
Lise, thank you. Our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucet, there. Well, here, hundreds of thousands of commuters are facing travel chaos as drivers on the Southern Railway stage a 48-hour strike in dispute over who should close train doors. More than 2,000 services between London and Surrey in Sussex have been cancelled. A further 24-hour walkout is planned for Friday. Well, our transport correspondent Richard Westcott is in Brighton for us now. Richard.
Well, this dispute's been rumbling on since April, but it went up a gear, well, it went up 2 gears really today because the drivers joined in. And to state the obvious, if you don't have drivers, you don't have trains. It's brought the whole southern network to a standstill.
6 a.m. Brighton. A sleepy start and a longer coach ride, but some had no choice if they wanted to get to London this morning.
Booked into a hotel for 3 nights. Just
At your own expense?
At my own expense, yes, yeah. Because I'm hourly paid, and if I don't get into work, I don't get paid. So.
Yesterday I had my morning train cancelled, or in fact it didn't even exist. It didn't say it was cancelled. Sometimes the train gets shown on the board and you sit on it for 10 minutes, then they tell you they're cancelling it.
I got the bus because I simply cannot rely on the trains.
Went to try and catch the 747 to Littlehampton. That wasn't existing, it wasn't even on the board.
And you would consider moving jobs just to get away from the train line now?
I've been considering it for about 3 months now, yeah.
All of Southern's 2,000 services cancelled today. This was rush hour in Horsham, Lingfield, East Grinstead.
Well, that about sums it up, really. 8 o'clock in the morning, one of the country's busiest commuter lines, nothing's moving.
Hiya.
How's it going? Can I get the usual, please?
The usual, of course.
They're paying the price all over Brighton. People are going out of business.
We've had a lot of customers that have actually changed their jobs on a permanent basis. They're no longer travelling, they're definitely no longer going into London, and that has had a direct effect on our business. We've lost about a third of our previous customers.
And you're packing up?
We're finishing on the 23rd of December as a direct result.
Because of the trains?
Yes, yeah.
Neither side will budge. Now the government's under pressure to step in.
This is a completely spurious strike by unions that are taking political action. There's no safety issue. The Chief Inspector of Rail Safety says it's perfectly safe. Trains are already operating in this way on this network, so the unions have got to stop pretending this is an issue about safety.
Southern wants drivers to take over closing the train doors, a job currently done by the on-board guard. One driver told us why they're fighting the move. We've protected his identity so he doesn't get into trouble.
We don't want to be responsible for somebody getting trapped between a train and the platform. getting seriously injured, and then being taken to court because it's your responsibility. That's at the heart of the issue. We want a second pair of eyes on the train to make sure nobody's trapped in those doors.
This is a small change, a current practice that already operates. So, the change is reasonable, and I think then the reaction from the unions has been disproportionate to the change that we want to make.
8 months after the first walkout, attempts to end this dispute are going nowhere.
Well, Rita, everybody is paying for this strike because it's costing taxpayers money. Southern works a bit differently from other rail franchises. Normally you'd have the private company taking the money from the fares. Southern works differently. It's actually the government that takes the money from the fares, and that means when there are strikes, when there's disruption, it's costing the government money, tens of millions of pounds, and of course that's taxpayers' money.
Thank you, Richard. Well, the industrial action has caused chaos for thousands of commuters, many of whom have had to try to find an alternative way of getting to work. Our correspondent Duncan Kennedy is at Horsham Station, where all the trains were cancelled. Duncan.
Yes, normally you'd have 10,000 commuters travelling through here in the morning, but as you say, none got through this morning. In fact, the station manager told us that all 27 stations in his patch were exactly the same, just as Richard was saying, right across Southern Rail. So how have people been getting into work? Well, many, of course, haven't given up and gone home. But some have struggled in, including two men that we spoke to, guys called Phil and John. They travelled separately into central London today and filmed themselves doing it. This is their story.
My name is Phil Horton. I'm about to leave my house in Caterham, and instead of getting the Southern train to Clapham Junction, I'm going to be driving due to the strike today.
Just stopped to get some petrol. This is what I'm faced with. I thought I'd send it in now because I should just be getting to Clapham Junction. In fact, I'm still in West Croydon. Over an hour now, still not to Norbury. As you can see behind me, that's why. It's getting pretty annoying, this, to be fair. Anyway, better join the queue again. Okay, so 9:20, here we are. Arrived safely, parked 5 minutes away from where I work, because all the parking spaces near where I work are taken. But we are here. Nearly, the best part of 3 hours for what should take tops on a bad day, an hour and 15 minutes. Yeah, joke.
I'm John. It's 6:45 at Reigate, where I'd normally be in the morning, trying to get into London and Victoria. Up to Baker Street should take me about an hour and 10 minutes, hour and 15 minutes. Today, who knows? We've driven from Reigate. We're now at Box Hill and West Humble Station, and there are trains running. They are trains that run, that's a different train company, so we should be fine. It's a longer journey, but we'll get there, I'm sure.
Severe delays downstairs on the Victoria. Different area signal failure. Currently, severe delays downstairs on the Victoria.
So we made it to Waterloo finally. Journey took about another half an hour plus half an hour to get to Dorking or Box Hill, but we made it in the end. So now just a tube and get on with the day. About 2 hours now. Should get in the office in another 20 minutes, and at least we got here. Okay, so that's it's 9 o'clock, so that's about 2 hours 15 minutes to get in, which is about an hour longer than usual. Made it. Good to finally get in, but I think I need more than anything else now is a cup of coffee.
Well, the story there of just two of tens of thousands of commuters who faced problems getting into work this morning, and no doubt they'll face similar problems getting home tonight, and if this is not resolved, the same again tomorrow, as well as on Friday. Rita.
Duncan, thank you. Well, let's go over to Westminster now and speak to our assistant political editor, Norman Smith. Norman, the Transport Secretary, Chris Grayling, is threatening to ban strikes on the railways. Is there an appetite in Westminster now, do you think, for a fight?
I think there is, Rita. I think ministers are preparing for a bust-up, but only after discovering when they tried to step into the ring at Southern, they pretty much had both hands tied behind their back because they found there was nothing legally they could do to stop the strike, that the union had followed the law to every dot and comma, and despite the disruption, despite the thousands of commuter lines cancelled, ministers could do zilch, which is why they are now looking at introducing fresh anti-strike legislation, including possibly a ban on stoppages on the railways. Now, that would be hugely controversial. It would almost certainly run into the buffers of human rights legislation. But the reason ministers are prepared to look at this is because they fear what is happening in Southern today could happen in other parts of the rail network down the line. And the union leadership, they believe, remains fundamentally opposed to a privately run rail network and wants to try and stampede ministers back towards public ownership. Now, none of that is going to make a blind bit of difference to the dispute at Southern. Indeed, the unions say by politicising the dispute, Mr Grayling may be making it even harder to reach an agreement, all of which I'm afraid suggests that there is no early end in sight to the strikes at Southern. More than that, we could be facing a fairly turbulent and difficult time on the railways more generally.
OK, Norman, thank you. Norman Smith there. Inflation has risen to a two-year high and now stands at 1.2%. Increases in the price of clothing, fuel and furniture, plus higher restaurant and hotel prices helped to push the rate up to its highest level since October 2014. Our correspondent Simon Gompertz reports.
This is where the price rises cut in British factories, here making kitchens in Hull.
This is our main joinery area.
Imported materials like wood are costing more because the pound has fallen in value.
We're importing most of our goods from Italy and Austria, and we've seen a real increase in price of 18%. We would not wish to pass that on to our own customers, so we're absorbing a massive amount of that and only increasing our prices by 8%.
This is European oak. There isn't enough of the British alternative. American black walnut. Even some of the drawers are made overseas and then brought in. There's a long tradition in this area of importing wood to manufacture in the UK, and that's put a huge pressure on costs.
The pressure can have an impact on employment too. 3 jobs, 10% of this workforce, have been lost. On average, just between October and November, furniture prices in the UK were up 0.5%, about the same for imported electronic gadgets. Clothing, 1.6%, coats especially. And petrol up by 1.6 pence a litre. People in Hull noticing some food prices rising too.
I was supposed to feed our children because money is going on gas, electric, water. There's your main priorities and your food.
I drive for a living and obviously fuel is going up alarmingly. You know, last year it was £1 and now it's like 10, 11, 15p dear a litre.
Shoppers are still finding bargains in the pre-Christmas rush. The worry is what happens to prices after that.
Well, inflation is still low by historical standards, of course, at over 1%, but the forecasts are that it could go up to 2.5%. Some people are saying 3%, maybe even 4% over the next couple of years. That, of course, eats away any wage increase that people are likely to get.
If you can get paid more, you can cover the increases. For people whose wages stay the same, household budgets may have to be trimmed. Simon Gompertz, BBC News, Hull.
The time now is 19 minutes past 1, our top story this lunchtime. The United Nations says it's received accounts from Aleppo of women and children being massacred by fighters loyal to the Syrian government and is warned of a complete meltdown of humanity. And coming up, they've been a familiar sight on Britain's streets for nearly 100 years, but are the days of the public phone box numbered?
In South today, a full local weather forecast. Also, we'll be in Portsmouth, where protesters have gathered to demonstrate against £9 million worth of budget cuts. And meet 5-year-old Zach from Fareham, possibly the youngest boy ever to win a golfing scholarship.
Now, a damning review by the Care Quality Commission has found that the NHS is putting lives at risk by failing to learn from the deaths of patients. The regulator concluded there isn't a single trust in England investigating deaths properly. It said the health service is often defensive about errors and families are regularly ignored or dismissed. The NHS has said the whole system must do better. Michael Buchanan reports.
This is what it's like to be ignored and dismissed by the NHS.
I would say we've been tortured, frankly. It's been like a living hell. The pain and the trauma of losing Kate has been compounded relentlessly by the process.
Kate died in 2009, just 6 hours old. Her death was avoidable.
Ready?
Go!
Mistakes by the NHS meant Isabella never knew her older sister. Compounding their loss, her parents had to fight relentlessly for 7 years to get the local hospital to take responsibility.
Her death was avoidable. They caused her death, step by step by step.
Unless you learn from a death, that death is even more pointless.
Yeah.
Today's report says the family's experience is far too common. No health trust in England is properly investigating deaths according to the Care Quality Commission. That means lessons aren't being learned, so other people die unnecessarily, and the families of the dead are often ignored or dismissed by the NHS.
I was shocked by the extent of the problem across the country. The consequences are, first of all, that we may miss opportunities to prevent deaths in the future, or certainly to improve care in the future. And of course, at the same time, we miss the opportunity of being open with families and carers.
This review was sparked by the death of Connor Sparrowhawk. The 18-year-old drowned in a bath while under the care of the NHS. His death was initially labelled as being of natural causes.
Order. Statement. The Secretary of State for Health.
In the Commons this lunchtime, the Health Secretary paid tribute to his family and said today's sobering report would lead to improvements.
The culture of the NHS is changing following a number of tragedies, but this report shows there is much progress to be made in the collecting of information about unexpected deaths, analysis of what was preventable, and learning from the results. Only by implementing its recommendations in full will we honour the memory of Connor Sparrowhawk.
From next April, therefore, all health trusts in England will have to regularly publish the number of preventable deaths there have been, part of a new effort to make the NHS safer, open and accountable. Michael Buchanan, BBC News.
Donald Trump has confirmed that the oil executive Rex Tillerson will serve as his Secretary of State. He said the boss of ExxonMobil had tenacity, broad experience and deep understanding of geopolitics. Mr. Trump's political opponents have questioned the appointment because of Mr. Tillerson's business interests in Russia. Well, let's speak now to our correspondent in Washington, Barbara Plett-Usher. And Barbara, this appointment comes days after the CIA accused Russia of interfering in the US election in favour of Donald Trump. But that doesn't seem to have deterred the president-elect.
No, not at all. In fact, he recently referred to Mr. Tillerson's Russian experience as an advantage. I mean, it's no secret that Mr. Trump admires President Putin, that he wants to reset relations with Russia, and this is probably part of that. But this will come up in confirmation hearings because senators do not think as favorably about Mr. Putin as Mr. Trump does, and they are alarmed by these renewed allegations of Russian meddling in the election. And they'll also want to ask Mr. Tillerson about sanctions because Exxon interests, business interests in Russia, have suffered because of the sanctions that were levied after the annexation of Crimea, and he has expressed opposition to them in the past. His extensive foreign experience does come pretty much exclusively through negotiating deals for Exxon. These are complicated negotiations. He deals with the main players, and so Mr. Trump saw that as an advantage. But we'll have to see how that translates into the world of diplomacy ultimately. Generally, though, I think his appointment reflects Donald Trump's belief that successful businessmen can be good at governing.
Thank you very much, Barbara. The skipper of a boat carrying migrants which sank off the coast of Libya with the loss of over 700 lives has been found guilty at a court in Sicily. Mohamed Ali Malik, a Tunisian, faces 18 years in jail. He was one of only 28 people who survived when the vessel went down in April last year. Around 3,500 post office workers are to go on strike for 5 days next week in a dispute over jobs, pensions and branch closures. The walkout will start next Monday and will include Christmas Eve. Well, our correspondent Judith Moritz is at a post office in Prestwich in Greater Manchester for us. And Judith, this is the busiest time of the year. What's it likely to mean for customers?
Well, during the strike, if you've got Christmas cards to post, pop them in the letterbox and you'll be fine. But if you need to send something recorded or special delivery, or you've got parcels to post over the counter and you live near one of the post offices like this one in North Manchester, which is due to close during the strike, you'll have to make other plans or your parcels won't get there in time for the big day. Now, the Communication Workers Union, who called the strike, say to an extent that's the point. They want to make a difference by putting the strike on now, and they say it's now or never. But there is some disagreement over how many people will be affected. The post office say there won't be chaos on the Christmas post because only 3% of their branches are due to close, around 300 out of a total of 12,000 in the UK. The union says yes, OK, but those branches are the ones which handle 20% of the total workload, and there are branches across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland taking part. So they expect customers to notice the difference. Can it be called off? Well, there are talks due to happen. I understand the union position is that there has to be real progress for them to consider cancelling the strike at this notice. And it's all about job losses and as well as that about pension plans and also plans to franchise post offices and take some of them into ownership of WH Smith. So there's a lot for them to talk about. The unions say that this is an escalation for them. It's the 4th strike they've had since September, and more staff are taking part than before.
Judith, thank you. The former Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev has accused the West of trying to provoke Russia and of plotting to oust President Putin. In an interview with the BBC, Mr. Gorbachev also described the breakup of the Soviet Union 25 years ago as a crime and a coup.
I'm sure that Western press, and that includes you, have been given special instructions to discredit Putin and get rid of him, to make sure he steps aside. But as a result, his popularity rating here is now 86%. Soon it will be 120%.
Now, they've been a familiar sight on Britain's streets for nearly 100 years, but are the days of the public phone box numbered? There are still more than 45,000 of them dotted around the country, but BT is now considering removing nearly a third of those because they're so rarely used. David Silito has been finding out more.
Well, they're an icon, aren't they? They're a design icon.
It's a crying shame to see them go.
The phone box, our proud little red friend, is looking a bit neglected.
Yes, it might be a design classic, but as you can see, it's seen better days. The cobwebs in here tell the full story, because the number of calls made from this particular box over the last year, 0.
Phone box usage has dropped 90% in 10 years. But here in Scorpion, North Yorkshire, they're determined to save their box, to house a defibrillator. Campaigner Bob Walton may love the box, but he's never used the phone.
How much is it?
60p minimum.
60p minimum.
Oh, no cash calls, it says. I think we're stuck.
Of course, it wasn't always like this. Some of us remember phone box queues.
And she's probably just gossiping too, the way women always do. There ought to be a law against it.
Yes, times change. But here in Ampleforth, a place where the phone signal can be, shall we say, patchy, Nikki and Peter from the White Horse do use theirs when the landline fails and they want to call BT.
Well, I ring BT from here. So these are, what are these ones we're looking at? These?
Those are K2s.
K2s?
Yeah.
But many will end up in places like this, Mike Shaw's refuge for homeless phone boxes. Of course, some of the older ones, when restored, aren't exactly worthless.
So what's the top price you've seen for one of these?
Well, I know a man that bought one from somebody down south, and I think he paid about 18,000.
18,000?
Yes, yeah.
It's not junk we're talking about here, is it?
No, we're talking about gold dust.
The phone box. There's a lot of love out there, but its era is over. David Sillito, BBC News, Scorby, North Yorkshire.
Let's take a look at the weather now. Here's Matt Taylor. Matt.
Hi, Rita. At least you don't need to hunker from a cold wind in one of those phone boxes this afternoon. But certainly for some of you, take a look at what you could have won. Lovely day across the Northwest Highlands of Scotland once again. The sun is out, but for most, this is probably a more familiar picture. Grey skies. It's been quite misty over some of the hills so far today. A little bit damp and drizzly too. Bands of rain or drizzle working their way northwards, but there are a few gaps in between. Northern Ireland, for instance, having a better afternoon, brightening up in northwest England too. And even into the evening, clearest the skies will be in the Northwest Highlands of Scotland. That'll be crucial as we go into the night, as I'll show you in a minute. But elsewhere across Scotland, cloudy with outbreaks of rain or drizzle moving from southern to central areas. Rain returns to the south of Northern Ireland by the time we hit the evening. Stays fairly clear in the north. Fairly misty, though, to end the day and go into the evening across northern England, North Wales and the Midlands with some patchy rain or drizzle. There will be some dry weather across southern parts, even a few clear skies around. Probably best favoured towards the Channel Islands, Devon, Cornwall and southwest Wales. And as I said, that could be crucial because tonight sees the peak of the Geminids meteor showers across the skies above the UK. Around 2 o'clock, probably see the peak intensity. It's going to be a difficult night, lots of cloud around, but northwest Scotland, Wales, southwest England, probably best favoured for the breaks, but don't write it off elsewhere because as we see patchy rain or drizzle work their way northwards, we will see a few cloud breaks across other parts of the UK. But by the end of the night, cloudiest conditions, western Scotland, Northern Ireland, with rain returning yet again. And, by and large, another very mild night. Temperatures above where they should be by day at this time of the year, never mind by night. Now, for tomorrow, there will be a few changes. Northern Ireland starts pretty wet, and that spreads its way into western Scotland through the day, eventually to Cardigan Bay, Cornwall. But really, across much of Wales, England and eastern Scotland, a vastly brighter day than we've seen so far this week. You should all get to see a little bit of sunshine, taking longest across parts of eastern England. Once that sun is out, it will feel very mild indeed. Temperatures 13 or 14 quite easily. The weather front, though, that pushes into Scotland, Northern Ireland, fizzles out as it works its way into England and Wales for Thursday. It does leave a lot of cloud again. Back to grey skies for some of you. Best of the breaks, probably East Anglia, the southeast, western Scotland. And for a time, Northern Ireland, but another weather front works in here by the end of Thursday. For Friday, we do it again with that front pushing eastwards, decaying into patchy rain or drizzle, leaving a lot of cloud. But we will finish the day with quite a bit of clear skies across Scotland and Northern Ireland, which sets us up for the weekend. If you've got any plans for this weekend, maybe pounding the high streets for those last-minute presents, well, most places will be dry. There will be a bit more sunshine around than many of you have seen this week. But if you see some sunshine by day with slightly cooler conditions expected, there'll be a bit of frost and fog by night. Rita.
Thank you, Matt. A reminder now of our main story this lunchtime. The United Nations says it's received accounts from Aleppo of women and children being massacred by fighters loyal to the Syrian government and is warned of a complete meltdown of humanity.
We've been receiving reports that many civilians have been detained by pro-government forces. We've also been informed that pro-government forces have been entering civilian homes and killing those individuals found inside, including women and children.
Well, that's all from the BBC News at 1, so it's goodbye from me. And on BBC One, we can now join the BBC's news teams where you are. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.